All right. I created this quick PSA, this public service announcement, because we just shot our first Native Liberty podcast. And I realized as I was editing it in post that I didn't introduce the speaker, my guest on the show, which was a good friend of mine who I've known for like 15 or 16 years, who I work with. Her name is Dawn, and she works on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. She's a member of that tribe. Nor did I introduce the book that we'd be reviewing, which is Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, which is a phenomenal book. It's a high-level, high-caliber scholarship on display. And it really does bring out what's going on today in our culture and where this movement came from, called identity politics or woke ideology or critical race theory. And it gives a good background into that. So that's the book we're reviewing. Also, I realized in post that I failed as a moderator to keep the conversation on the topic. So if you see a bunch of jump cuts and jump edits, that's my fault, because we ended up going off all these tangential points and I edited that out. So I'm guilty of that. The other thing is I didn't realize, like, if you can hear right now, I apparently live underneath a airline highway. So like every 30 seconds, there's another plane. And it's like, I couldn't find a time frame to shoot this podcast. And that's kind of why there was also a delay in getting this up on video. I also tried to mitigate that low rumbling noise of the plane by lowering the bass. But because I have such a manly voice, with such a low, deep voice, because I'm a man, it didn't work out good. So I tried to mitigate that. So again, I also, one of the cameras died. So if you're watching it and it just ends at the end of the podcast, that's why, because the camera died. So I did my best to edit all that out in post. So this is a learning process. If there's any unprofessionalism, it's on me, not the guest or anybody else. So without further ado, here's our first podcast with Native Liberty. Thanks. So what did you think about the book?
Honestly, at first, when I first read it, I don't know if it was me, because I would read it at night before I went to sleep, or help me go to sleep, because that's what I normally do, is I read before I go to sleep. So it was kind of hard at first, because then I would only read a couple pages and I fall asleep. And then I was like, man, I'm not even understanding. So I got like a quarter way of the book, and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm reading, because I'm not paying attention. So I reread it over. I started it over, and then I liked it. I mean, the fact that I heard people on news talk about CTR, and I didn't really know what it was about. I mean, I know you mentioned it one time when I was talking to you, and you were talking about it, and then all the stuff that's been going on last year and how everything's been happening. But I didn't really know about it, and after reading more things, not too much, but just the news and like reading certain things online and seeing stuff, made me think more about it and really want to know like what's going on, and help me to understand a little bit more. There's some things like in the beginning, the first 2 chapters, I still don't comprehend, because it talks about the history.
Oh, like of postmodern thought?
Yeah. And it kind of goes all over, kind of. So I was like, I kind of don't get this part of it. But as I went on and it started talking about how they're putting everyone in different categories, and how they're trying to, I don't know, do different things. And then when I go and I read stuff, I always think about how it affects me and my family, and how it's going to affect our community, and my community, and how I see certain things and how it's changing. And I mean, I don't know, all that, but it's helped me to open my eyes a lot more to want to read more and understand more.
Yeah. It's like, I think the beginning section is kind of confusing, because it's the introduction to the book, but it's also, they're trying to set the stage for what the book is about. And I think they're like, at the beginning of it, it's trying to explain what postmodern theory is, and how postmodernism as a philosophical movement has infiltrated academia, like to such a point that it's no longer like a periphery view. It's part of the mainstream of the campus, and it's bled out into the streets. And so that it's affecting culture throughout, and that there's it goes deep. It goes all the way to the 1960s to the actual founders of postmodernism, which would be like Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Lyotard, and Baudrillard. But it goes back further to what's called post-structuralism, structuralism, to Ferdinand de Saussure, all these different French authors. Hold on a second. Almost broke my thing right there. I forgot to turn my phone off. Darn it. Hold on one second. This will be all edited out right here. But did you get the overall like gist of the book, I guess? Or did you understand it?
I think so. I mean, I still probably want to read it again.
I mean,
to make sure to understand fully. I mean,
yeah.
Or because I never heard about postmodern theory before.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I felt like because I don't understand that, I'm not going to understand what all this other stuff is.
It's almost like it's confusing because it's a new topic to anybody if you're not familiar with it. And then it's confusing because postmodernism by definition is ambiguous. Mm-hmm. It's the whole point is to be ironic, playful, and subversive. So that's already like going against you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you get bogged down in what's called like epistemological questions of like, what is truth? How do you know that? You know, and I guess my point is, let me ask this question. What do you think of the whole social constructivism, social construct view of knowledge, of truth? Is it something that's objective or is it something completely subjective that we just make up? What do you think about that? If you have an opinion.
I don't know.
It's all right.
I don't even have an opinion.
Well, no. Okay, so let me. So that's good. No, that's good. That's what I created this podcast for. Is that I don't want everybody to have expert opinions. That's the whole reason is to have a conversation. But so let me try to explain it in the way that I've grasped it. You know, I have all these books in this room. The books behind me, I have probably like 15 or 20 books on postmodernism. Even some versions of postmodernism coming from like a Christian background theologically. Mm-hmm. But postmodernism in a nutshell is, well, see, that's just it. Like one of the definitions of postmodernism is that it's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. It's like an impossible task because it's so diverse, but there are core beliefs within the theory itself.
Oh, is that the 5 of them or the 4 of them that they have?
Yeah, definitely. Like there's one of the parts of postmodern, or one of the aspects of postmodernism is that we don't have access to objective truth that exists independently of us, that our subjectivity as human beings so taints and colors the interpretation that we can never gain. There's different interpretations. This is where it gets confusing because there's different interpretations of postmodernism. Some hold to a very hardcore form of it. It's like, I guess you could say, where they view knowledge is so subjective that there is no such thing as truth. Truth doesn't exist. And that we're just pretending that it does, that we can have access to it, that there is such a thing. The more softer version of postmodernism argues that there is truth, but we just can't get access to it because we're so mired in our own subjectivity and our own culture that we have no way of actually seeing it. So at first glance, that sounds like, okay, that doesn't seem to be too radical, but that's actually the most radical part of it, is because if we don't have access to objective truth, then what that entails is not only a form of cultural relativism, but ethical relativism, which means if we don't have access to truth, then there's no such thing as right and wrong. And if that's the case, like I've said before to people, like if you hold to an ideological position that undermines the very foundation of morality, then you have no reason to fight for anything that you're fighting for. No. Then what does it matter then if there is no such thing as right and wrong, if there's no objective dimension, no objective standard, no objective right and wrongness to the universe, then what does it matter if, the federal government broke every treaty it's ever dealt with Native people? What does it matter if Native Americans had their land taken from them? It doesn't matter. And especially like with the Black community, if there's no such thing as right and wrong, if everything is just a social construct, then what does it matter if Rosa Parks sits at the back of the bus or the front of the bus? What does it matter if slavery is a legal institution or illegal? And if you hold to that theory of social constructivism, why fight against racism? Why fight against discrimination? Why try to mitigate or combat sexism or bigotry? So that's the whole point of like the radicalness of this worldview, is that I think a lot of people will absorb it, or a lot of people absorb it without realizing the actual implications of it. Right. Like, and this is one of my next videos is going to be a really in-depth critique of it, is that if you actually hold to this social construction view of reality, well, guess what? That also applies to your view as well. Yeah. You've cut yourself off now. If you hold to that view, I'm just going to apply. That's kind of my second. I think one of the videos I said is that if you hold to a position that refutes itself, that position is false and contradictory.
Yeah.
So if you believe that reality is just a social construct, well, then that position itself is just a social construct. So why should I even listen to you? You know what I mean? So you've undermined your own position for me to take you seriously.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like one part of it.
So why is it that these people that are pushing this thing, is it because they know people don't understand it and they think, and they're just trying to confuse them and make it sound like it's a good thing and it's going to help everyone and it's going to bring people together? Yeah,
I think so. But yeah, I definitely think that. But I also think there's a lot of more cultural factors. I think some of these scholars, I wouldn't call them scholars. I wouldn't call them academics. These guys are charlatans. And they're wolves in sheep's clothing. Mm-hmm. They're not real academics. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff from real high caliber academics, and these guys are just pretending. But postmodernism started. Well, how can I like? That's a good question, but it's so. Well, it starts. That's almost a whole episode. No, but I'll give you a brief one. So, like in the history of thought, there's a pre-modern view of things, right? Mm-hmm. The pre-modern view is like the world that faith is at the pinnacle, right? Yeah. Theology is the queen of the sciences. The church is the epicenter of life. Yeah. And there's an order and balance to the world because God has created this world. And so there's definitely, he's an orderly God. So the world is rational, objective. Everybody has their own unique position and place in society because of God's existence. Mm-hmm. And then that view of the world, the pre-modern view of the world, was overtaken by the modern view of the world. So the modern view of the world says that it was another thing. I left this out. The pre-modern view of the world has faith and reason in like a symbiotic relationship. They're both together. The modern view of the world rejects that and says, and it elevates reason above faith. So faith is like way down here. It's almost like non-existent. And the modern view of the world, like, is probably, most people will say, from the age of the 17th century of René Descartes up until about the First World War. Okay. And this is the modern view of the world, is the view that if we use reason, which is objective and universal, and we can all get to with logic and objectivity and rationality, and we can access truth. And if we learn and educate one another, we'll usher in this period of prosperity and harmony and international balance and all these wonderful things. And so the modern view of the world also brought about the belief in progress. That's where the belief in progress was born from, is this modernistic view, interpretation of the world. And it also gave itself to this almost, I would say, like a blind optimism or Pollyannish optimism, that, everybody was really optimistic. Like once we educate everybody and we push this out there, these things can be learned by any culture, any people. Well, that was completely devastated because of World War I. And then completely nuked off the face of the earth after World War II. There was so much destruction and devastation and lives lost that modern view of the world was shown for what it was. It was an illusion, if you will. Yeah. That reason can be used to create havoc on the earth and hell on the earth. And so what set in, the culture, or the world culture, swung the opposite way. The pendulum swung from this high sense of optimism to like cynicism and despair. And that was the birth of like nihilism, which means nothingness, existentialism. And then that gave birth to what's called postmodern theory, which is the opposite. So now we went from faith and reason being joined together to faith being here, reason being here. And now reason's dethroned and there's nothing to look forward to. So we have nothing. There's no reason. There's no objectivity. There's no faith. There's no faith. There's nothing there's no permanence, no stability, no fixity within the culture, within our beliefs. Our beliefs are just completely arbitrary. They're subjective. And that's why the postmodernists say that behind our most cherished beliefs is nothing but, when you strip everything away, is nothing but power. We're trying to apply power into the world to make sense of it. And by doing that, by superimposing our narratives into the world, we're actually also infusing that narrative with power, which necessarily oppresses some people, and other people become privileged or dominant, dominant discourse. So that's kind of where it's almost like you have, before you can learn, so it's almost like you have to learn the history of ideas or philosophical thought for postmodernism to make sense. Because without that, it's like, I don't understand. It's almost like it is so foreign to people, which it is. It's like, what's this postmodern? What are you talking about? Like post what? Like,
and that's why I was like, it's probably like 200 20 more books in front that I'm supposed to read to understand
exactly
this part.
Yeah, that's where it gets most people tripped up. Because I remember when I started reading this, probably back when I'll probably say I was 28 or 29, I first came across this, and it was actually some Christian authors that had talked about this infiltrating the church back then, and that there was this liberation movement. So I thought, well, I'm going to read this stuff, and then I come across what's called, ethical relativism, and there's different forms of it, cultural relativism. So even how this plays out in like anthropology, if you hold to a postmodern view of anthropology, you won't judge other cultures. Which there's a certain scientific understanding of that, which I agree with at a certain level. Like, if you're going to observe another culture, you need to be distanced from it, and not try to get into it and influence it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if another culture is doing something that is morally wrong, which like today we see like what's happening in Sudan and then all over the Middle East, where you have 8-year-old girls, 10-year-old little girls being forced into forced marriages with 30-year-old, 40-year-old men. That's disgusting to me. Yeah. I don't care anything about
the culture.
Yeah. Like what you're doing is wrong. Yeah. And so that's why what was so weird to me is that if you go to any feminist literature of the third wave of feminism, which is what we're going through right now, you don't see anything being published to help out the international community. It's complete silence. It's like just complete silence on this subject. And it's because the reason why that is that way, you would think that we live in the most prosperous country in the world, that we'd have a group of scholars and peoples coming together to help these poor little girls, right? I mean, that's basically rape to me as his father. That's disgusting, right? So you would think that people would have a moral impulse, but they don't want to betray their theory, because their theory says that that's the height of oppression. You're imposing your discourse on a third world country. And it's like, that's what I mean. It's like, that's the danger of ideological thinking, is that you allow the ideology to do the thinking for you. And it's like, no, when you do that, you're actually you're not being a human being anymore. Yeah. That's awful. Like, to me, the whole point of being human is that you use your mind and moral. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
To go and say that's wrong. I don't care what. Yeah. And we're going to go help them.
Exactly. And so it's like even if like natives had some sort of practice that was, I don't know, let's say like it would be like, for instance, in India, they have a practice where they don't really do it much anymore. I forget I forgot the name of the practice. I think it starts with the S. Satui. I forgot the name of it, but where the husband dies, and on his funeral procession, they light him on fire, and the woman's role is to jump into that fire and sacrifice, give her life, die with her husband. Wow. And that's wrong. I mean, I get from her perspective. Yeah. But like also at the same time, what if she doesn't want to do that? Then she's ostracized in her community. And and it's like, I just don't,
and she doesn't even have the right to say, no, I don't want to go.
And this, what's really fascinating is there's actually, and this is why I don't like this ideology, because there's actual Indian scholars from India. Mm-hmm. There's actually, I forget the lady's name now, and she's a scholar. She's actually a feminist, and she's one of the few feminists arguing that this ideology is terrible, because I'm from India. I'm an actual indigenous person from India. And I'm telling you that what you guys are saying is you're not offering any assistance for these poor women who are suffering. Like you're actually stopping the help from coming. And she's saying that we need to base our theories on some sort of empirical reality, actual realities that are connected to, observations and theories that are connected to reality. Yeah. And not this stuff that's just made up fantasy. Yeah, made up stuff.
How long do you think this stuff's going to catch on, and where do you think it's going to go from here?
I think it's already caught on. I think it's all over the culture right now. Yeah. I think that's I honestly think that this is the next great turning point, not just in American history, but I think world history. I think we're actually hitting to dark times. I mean, there's always the possibility we could turn out of this. One of the things, that's a good question, because one of the things that people have noticed that study religion is that there tends to be a 15th to 16th month high period where and everybody's experienced it, where you have a conversion experience and you're all in love with whatever, like people, like within Christianity, you'll have this, you're born again experience, right? Yeah. And at the first year and a half of it, you're like on this cloud where it's like, you're trying to tell everybody, this is what I went through. I'm happy. Here, let me give you the good news. Mm-hmm. The same thing. And it's what's crazy is the same exact similarities are within this ideology. It's called instead of, in Christian terminology, it's called being born again. Yeah. And this ideology, it's called going woke. You're converted to being woke. It's the parallels are so frighteningly similar to a secular religion. But what was your question again?
So, okay, you're saying that it's already taking over. So I asked, what do you think's gonna happen next, or what do you think? How far is it gonna go, or is it gonna make?
I think it's gonna be totalitarianism again. I don't want it to be, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but I think that we're already seeing it now, where society is being set up. If we don't go separately our own ways peacefully, we're headed for trouble. But the fact that a whole group of people, you're labeling them as an enemy of the state, that's frightening. We're going down those roads where Stalin and Lenin and Hitler went down.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
It's my twin inside. So the reason why I think it's so influential in the culture is, I'm sorry, how should I say that? Like, it's everywhere in the culture. I mean, that's what I was kind of getting to. Yeah. I stopped that list at like, I think 10 items, but every segment of society is dealing with this now.
Yeah.
And a lot of people I don't know if they have their head in the sands, but they're not seeing it. I think 3 weeks ago, I was talking to my son and he told me that Cobra Kai, that Netflix or YouTube show, they're now under fire by the woke ideology. And they're saying that Karate Kid, the Cobra Kai does two things. It endorses Orientalism and cultural appropriation. And they're not happy with the cast members on the show. They should be who they claim to be. And it's like, wait, they're actors. This is the point of acting. Now I get like this is where like we talked about earlier, like I get at a certain level, like, yeah, if you're going to have a movie about Geronimo and it's going to be played by a non-native, like, yeah, that's totally like, that's what is wrong with you?
You ever watch Yellowstone?
No,
It's a show with Kevin Costner and Native and whatever. And the lead girl in the woman, I thought she was Native because she was in another movie called Wind River. I thought she was Native. And then they natives were saying, that's not even Native. She's like Asian.
Oh, really?
And so like natives are upset, like saying, why couldn't you pick a Native woman to play that role? Which I agree with.
Yeah, me too. See, it's almost like that's where I think we need to take it on a case by case basis, everybody, and not have this. This is what the problem of ideologies is. Everybody has this huge ideological assumption and they apply that filter through everything. It's like, no, things are contextual. Like apply this to this case. Now, like, like to me, that's like the old Westerns where it was like they had a blue-eyed Native guy. I mean, they can actually, that can happen, of course. Yeah. But I mean, so I get some level of criticism, and that's a valid level of criticism of that. But to argue that actors should always be represented, it's like that's the point of acting, But that's an affront to this ideology because it sees that as a dominant discourse of power.
Yeah.
But like people don't. So like I'm gonna say this, like, and I agree with this too. Like a lot of people will say that all these people that are being canceled are millionaires. They're super famous people. They're it's like, and there is some hypocrisy too because there's people that are being canceled or they're saying they're being canceled. Well, at the same time, they're on TV telling everybody, to millions of people, that I'm being canceled. It's like, so wait, you're not able to get a book deal, and you're telling everybody on multiple TV networks, like that's not really being canceled. What I'm worried about and what is happening, all you got to do is Google it, is we're talking about mom and pop shops are being shut down. Yeah. They're being disrupted because they're not going along with the woke ideology, with the social justice activism or the critical race theory. And they're being taken apart. It's happening across the country. I mean, you just think of, and then, like I said in one of the videos, the point of that is to, from this worldview, is to problematize. So that's another good question. Are you familiar with the whole how this book came about with the Grievance affair, the Grievance studies affair?
No, I don't know that one.
You don't?
No,
okay,
I never heard of that before.
Okay, so where to start? Let's see. So I'm going to back up and go 22 years into the future, into the past. So in 1996, there was a man named Alan Sokal, and it was called the Sokal hoax or the Sokal affair. And he was a famous physicist, and he published a paper called "Transgressing the Boundaries: Transforming the Hermeneutic of Quantum Physics." Which right there, as soon as you hear those kind of that terminology, it should like set bells off. But what he was trying to do, he submitted a scholarly article to a famous journal called Social Text, I believe was the name of the journal. And he was trying to show that this journal would accept this. But basically he was arguing that quantum theory is a social construct of power, and it's not real. It's just a social construct. There's no objective dimension to it. And the reason why he did this is because this is when postmodernism at its time was still in its embryonic form. I mean, it was already out in the culture, but it wasn't as it is today. And there had been publications saying that such things as this, that Newton's Principia Mathematica, this famous textbook, was a rape manual for rape. That Einstein's E equals MC squared was a sexist equation because it valued the speed of light as an absolute over other absolutes or over other theories. I was like, where are you getting this stuff from, right? This is crazy stuff. So Alan Sokal, he submits this article, which is basically nonsense. What he did is he learned the nomenclature, the jargon of postmodernism and the social constructivistic movement. He learned it in and out, and he applied it to quantum theory, and he submitted it. That's why the name of it is Transgressing the Boundaries. He was arguing that quantum theory isn't real. It's just a made-up social construct. He was completely making this up. It was all gibberish. Yeah. Sure enough, it got accepted. This is supposed to be a scholarly reviewed, peer-reviewed journal of the highest caliber scholarship. And he was trying to show that there's a problem in academia. Even back then in 1996, that these academicians are not stuff that isn't even. There's no basis in reality. There's no empirical grounding. That's what I was saying. I think in one of the videos where I said, like, it's theory upon theory upon theory,
but it's never tested.
There's no bedrock. And that's one thing. Like, I'm against empiricism, which is most people are today. That you shouldn't apply what you do for the hard sciences to social sciences.
They're separate.
Yeah, they're separate, and because the hard sciences, they're called hard for a reason, because it's physical, and you can retest it and get confirmation. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that your theory should be. You still want it to be empirical. You know what I mean? It's one thing to believe in empiricism; it's another thing to have something be empirical. And these theories don't have any basis, any grounding in reality. So that became called the Sokal affair, and it's funny because people took sides on the issue. People accused him of intellectual dishonesty for doing that. And at the same time, though, the people like me on my side of I would agree with him that what he was exposing was this rot that was setting in at the core of higher education, and now it's just gotten worse. And it was almost as if you could see the cultural war in a microcosm form, because what he was doing. The reason why people were so upset with him is because he was puncturing their sacred cow. This sacred cow of social constructivism has, this, and I get this as a human being, that we all have a worldview that we hold to. And the reason why it was because those worldviews, they give our life meaning. Like, we filter the world through and how we move in this world. They situate us. And if somebody comes along and starts poking fun at my worldview, we're going to take that on a very personal level as a threat. And so, but at the same time, it's also, as a human being, you should want to make sure that what you're believing is actually based in truth. Is there a reality in this? And I would hope that people would want to see that, or at least desire that. But because to me, that's actually, when you're holding to a falsehood, that's actually the truest form to me of oppression. That when you're freed from that falsehood, you're actually liberating that person, and you're doing them a favor with this. So fast forward to 2017, 2018. And you have three scholars, James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and Peter Boghossian. And they basically, it's called Sokal Squared. So they redo. Exactly. So I think they had 20 articles going. 7 of them were published before they were exposed. So what they did is they published these articles in scholarly, peer-reviewed journals. And one of them was about rape culture. And that how men with their dogs, I think it was called Dog Park. It was about masculine men that have dogs permeate the culture with a form of rape culture, because the dogs go and hump other dogs. And so they're a byproduct of these men. So we need to stop these men from doing that. It's like, oh my God, it's just like, it's insanity. Actually, you know what? Let me read some of that. Hold on.
That's funny. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah. So let me just read some of this. This is from James Lindsay's website, New Discourses.
Okay.
And this is what he says, that he's kind of explaining what the whole grievance affair is. So he says this: something has gone wrong in the university, especially in certain fields within the humanities. Scholarship based less upon finding truth and more upon attending to social grievances has become firmly established, if not fully dominant. Within these fields, and these scholars increasingly bully students, administrators, and other departments into adhering to their worldview. And then he goes on. I won't read everything here, but he talks about in this section 2 about their objective. It says that our objective was to learn about this culture and establish that we had become fluent in its language and customs by publishing peer-reviewed papers in its top journals, which usually only experts in the field are capable of doing. While our papers are all outlandish and intentionally broken in significant ways, it is important to recognize that they blend in almost perfectly with others in this discipline under consideration. Our paper writing methodology always followed a specific pattern. It started with an idea that spoke to our epistemological or ethical concerns within the field, and then sought to bend the existing scholarship to support it. The goal was always to use whatever the existing literature offered to get for some little bit of lunacy or depravity to be acceptable at the highest levels of intellectual responsibility. Therefore, each paper began with something absurd or deeply unethical, or both, that we wanted to forward or conclude. We then made the existing peer-reviewed literature to do our bidding in the attempt to get published in the academic canon. So there was a real, and so they succeeded here. And here's the part. So this is one of the parts where he says that sometimes we just thought of a nutty or an inhumane idea and ran with it. What if we write a paper saying we should train men like we do dogs to prevent rape culture, hence the name Dog Park? Another tough one for us was, I wonder if they'd publish a feminist rewrite of a chapter from Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. The answer to that question turns out to be yes. So they did that as well. Like, this is the lunacy we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the reason why they brought this up, this whole grievance studies. Though it doesn't seem immediately obvious, this is a kind of blatant corruption. In this way, politically biased research that rests on highly questionable premises gets legitimized as though it is verifiable knowledge. It then goes on to permeate our culture because professors, activists, and others cite and teach this ever-growing body of ideologically skewed and fallacious scholarship. This matters because even though most people will never read a single scholarly paper in their lifetimes, peer-reviewed journals are the absolute gold standard of knowledge production. And these concepts eventually leak into culture. So he goes on from there. But yeah, that's...
So what was the turn of the time? Like, why are these scholars all of a sudden, these professors all of a sudden allowing this to come into college and believing it?
That's just it. That's what I think is what you're seeing. And within academia it is a form of the groupthink.
Yeah.
Where everybody has to think that way. And there is a peer pressure.
I was going to say, is it by the college? That's why, because of whether they'll get hired or published and stuff like that.
If you don't agree with the dominant literature or what's out there,
they're not going to publish.
Yeah, you won't be published. You won't get tenure. You won't be accepted. You'll just be completely, ostracized from the community. And so what's fascinating is that there's a lot of scholars who actually agree with them, as well as but they don't say nothing. So from what this is, again, they're not going to reveal their sources because they're not going to hurt these people's career.
Yeah.
But James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, Peter Boghossian, they can't stand them because, again, they're poking fun at their sacred cows. I'm not poking fun, but they're showing that there's a problem.
Yeah.
But to me, what's really tragic is that most Americans don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And they just assume that what they're getting fed from the news, that is like, it's the gospel truth. And so they themselves have kind of bought into this. So again, the thing just keeps spreading and spreading. And it's like, it's really bad. So yeah, what I was going to say now, I totally lost my train of thought.
Well, you explained your grievance studies affair, right?
Yeah.
How it got into college and how they did the,
it's like, if your daughter's in college.
Yeah. Well, it's a what do you call it? Technical? It's not.
Oh, like
it's a
STEM.
Art, yeah, it's art.
Okay, yeah. So well, they'll probably still get to it in there.
Yeah.
Because that's where people are complaining that I'm in an engineering class and we're learning this stuff in engineering.
Really?
Yeah, we're being force fed this stuff in mathematics class.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So college is,
it's almost like it's not that like how me and you probably think of college. Our generation, especially my mom's generation, is that college is.
You have your social science, humanities, and then you have your science, or your math and.
Well, it's almost like the older conception of the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's gone.
Yeah,
that doesn't exist anymore. And then, when I was in college, I already knew that was happening because I was in a history class. It was on the Roman Republic, and in the middle of the class, we're talking about Obamacare, and I'm like, What does this have to do with anything from the Roman Republic? Like I wanted the teacher to stop talking about that and stop proselytizing for her position, and just give me what I paid to learn from.
Yeah.
I had another class. I did I ever tell you that story where I had the professor cuss me out?
I think so. When you were trying to.
So let me just. I'll tell, because this is like what happened back then. This is what. Gosh, how long ago was this now? This was probably back when I was 32. So yeah, it was a while ago. So, I was in a higher level philosophy course. I passed into it. It was a 300 level, and it was supposed to be about comparative ethics, right? And so me, that's just like my bread and butter. I'm like, great, we're going to learn about deontological ethics. We're going to learn about virtue ethics. We're going to learn about Thomas Aquinas, Immanuel Kant, Jeremy Bentham, utilitarianism. We're going to learn all these things and go at it. And instead, we just watched movies. That was it. We just 16 weeks of movies, and there was no major thesis at the end. It was just, he wanted us to print something off the internet and put it into like a binder and show that we studied it. There was no testing. It was just a complete lack of learning, right? But that's not the gist of the story. Which, as bad as that is, which I'm thinking, man, I'm actually someone who wants. I want high scholarship. I want to be challenged. I want to show that I've merited my A, not just being given to me. With everybody else. So, and right on the first day of class, when you usually go over your syllabus, right? The teacher's going over his syllabus, and he stops in the middle of his syllabus and he says, "Okay, I'm going to give you something." He goes, "I've been teaching for 25 years now. I have a degree in philosophy. My thesis, my major thesis, my master's, no, my thesis, my doctoral is in deconstructionism." And I remember thinking, oh my God, what a waste of a degree, because I know this stuff, right? And I think that he's saying this to, like, everybody, especially, that's what I think. I was 32 at the time. I'm in a classroom with 18, 19, 22-year-olds, 21-year-olds. And I think he's doing, I know what he's doing. He's trying to impress them and try to overwhelm them with his authority figure. And so he breaks off of his, what he was talking about, the syllabus, and he says, "I'm going to give you the secret. This is the secret to life. We don't exist. Everything is an illusion." And I just went, oh my God, did he just say that? Like, are you kidding me? Like, he's proselytizing. This is not what I came to this classroom to learn about philosophy and ethics specifically. And instead he's giving me his position. And right off the bat, 2 students raised their hand, and one yelled out, "I get it. I watched this movie, The Royal Tenenbaums, and I understand what you're saying." I was like, I don't even know how she got that synthesis together, which I thought, whatever. I was listening to it. It was entertaining what she was saying. Then another guy raised his hand, or he just blurted out, "Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like, I've always been thinking about that. Like, what's the point of this? Because it doesn't exist, or, it's just all an illusion." And so I'm thinking, man, should I say anything? Because, I don't want to disrupt the class, and, but as a father, because my daughter at the time was, I think, 5 or 6, and I was thinking, I can't abide by this. I have to protect these kids in any way I can, even though if it's minor. I've got to defend the truth, because I don't want these kids to go down this road. And I know what this guy's doing. I know him because, I know that subject. So I raise my hand and I say, "Professor," I won't say his name, "Professor, can I play devil's advocate?" And he goes, you can be anything you want. I'm like,
just say, because it's not real.
And I just thought, you have no idea what's about to come your way. So I said, "Can you refute Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am?" And he's like that, and kind of looks at me odd. I said, "Well, what I'm getting to is the fact that you said that we don't exist, but you have to exist before you can deny existence. You have to affirm that which you're trying to deny, right?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, no problem. I'll no problem." He just kept talking, but he never did. So about 5 or 10 minutes go by, and he keeps going off on his kind of his Buddhistic philosophy of nothing exists. We're not real. It's just an illusion. And I'm like, I can't, like, he's not doing it. He's not answering my question. And so I said something again to him. I said, correct me if I'm wrong, Professor so-and-so, but doesn't an illusion require an illusionist? And if everything is an illusion, why are you the only one that's able to rise above the illusion and pinpoint it that's an illusion? What makes you so special? And he couldn't answer me. And I said, what I'm trying to get to is the fact that we have to exist before we can deny existence. This is a logical principle. And he just immediately goes, "You know what? You don't understand a thing. You don't understand a goddamn thing." Like that. And I was like, what? Like, just happened. Like, I didn't get offended because I was like, I could crush you physically and I could crush you intellectually. But I just remember thinking, like, this guy's a charlatan. He is not a professor. He is And to me, like, I looked at him and his profession and all my teachers, like, you have what I want to do.
Yeah.
I want to impart knowledge to kids, to children, and to mold and help and shape them and protect them and to give them truth so they can live fulfilled lives and not a bunch of lies. And this is what he was doing. And I knew that he knew what I knew he was doing, what he was doing. And that's why I think he didn't have any outlet. Because to me, when a human being acts like that, blurts out, that means they have nothing underneath them.
Yeah.
And I remember it was crazy is that I could tell for the next 8 weeks, the students in the classroom, they didn't like me. You could just feel, I mean, again, this is my own anecdotal, personal, subjective interpretation. But I felt this tension whenever I showed up. I was like, oh God, here comes this guy who thinks he knows everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I didn't speak up. I've always been respectful because that to me is how you persuade people. Is, you're respectful.
Yeah.
And you bring basically truth to the table, and you leave that to them. You persuade them. You don't try to bully them. So about the 8th or 9th class, he went off on his. We were going over Plato. Actually, we were supposed to be going over Plato, but we were watching a movie, and something happened. I don't remember what it was. But he started talking about we don't exist, everything's an illusion, basically Buddhist philosophy or Buddhistic worldview. And this young kid in the middle of the classroom, he goes, dude, can you stay on the topic, man? We get what you're doing. Like I get this whole, like, we don't exist thing, but like, this is like the 3rd or 4th time you've done it. I didn't pay and I was like, oh my God, this guy has more cojones than I have. Even I wouldn't say it like that, but
he just straight
And the professor, he like turned red, and he goes, he tried to backtrack. Oh, you caught that? Okay, yeah. So that was my pedagogical trick. I'm like, you're lying, man. And I was just like, man, you're full of crap.
We'll see. You at least got one student to see and to recognize it, or else the rest of them would have been blind sheep and just following along.
And what was amazing is that one student, it was a black girl. At the beginning of the class, she's the one that talked about the Royal Tannenbaums and her connection with it, which I still don't get. Actually, I went and watched that movie just because she said that to understand what she was saying. I still can. I get the movie. I understand like the script writing and the videography. I mean, I know what the guy's thinking, but I'm off on a tangent here. But we were going over Joseph Campbell, his monomyth theory. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but Joseph Campbell's was a prominent intellectual during like the 70s and 80s. He was actually the one that George Lucas used to base his Star Wars trilogy off of. The hero's journey. You've heard of the hero's journey. And the hero goes on this journey, and he gets involved in an adventure, and he basically faces this choice where he has to be true to himself, but he also discovers himself in the process. It's the hero's journey. He has to overcome some cosmic battle that really is himself fighting himself, So like for Luke Skywalker, has to overcome his father's tendency towards evil and not become his father. And there's validity to that. And I think it's really a beautiful story. The problem with his monomyth theory, which is I picked up right off the bat because we had to read the entire book, is that whenever Joseph Campbell comes across indigenous cultures, the monomyth, let me put it like this. The monomyth theory was that every culture, whether it's the most primitive indigenous tribe or the most sophisticated modern socialite, they all have a hero's journey. They all have a story, and that's not the part that's controversial. What he would do is he would argue that this view is universal, and what he would do is flatten out any distinctiveness, any uniqueness of an indigenous community. So, for instance, if any indigenous community didn't have the story that he was looking for, he discarded the evidence.
Yeah.
If an indigenous community, like for instance, my own tribe, the Hopi, if they didn't agree with his conception of his monomyth, he didn't bring it up in his writing at all. You didn't come across it. So I wrote in the paper, and I even said it in class. And before I had a chance to finish what I was about to say, because I was trying to refute this position, that girl goes, "You know what that is?" She cut me off. "That's academic imperialism." And I went, "That's exactly what this is." Like I couldn't. She actually articulated in a real concise form what was happening was that this guy had created a theory, and instead of allowing the evidence to speak, which in this case is actual indigenous people, he was flattening them out, and he was not including them in his theory. This is what I was talking about, like in group, like there's more disagreements within a group than there is between groups. And like that's we see that within our own families. Everywhere we go, there's disagreement within every group you get into. That's just like a law of human nature, because we're all individuals. So so what I see within Joseph Campbell and his academic imperialism Which again, just me saying that is going to offend a lot of people if they ever listen to this podcast, especially if they like him.
Yeah.
But that's what these scholars and so-called academics are doing today. If you disagree with identity politics or with the group, you're not included. So that's what they say, that's what your identity in the group is more important than your individual beliefs. So again, it's like, what are you guys believing? I don't know. It's all over the place. So. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it does. I mean, I don't think that's fair though, because it takes away me as an individual.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna tell just because I don't believe with you. I get what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but because you tell me it's red, I know it's not red.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you know, and you're telling me I gotta say it is because you tell me to.
Yeah. Well, it's even worse. It's even worse because what this theory has done to shelter itself from criticism is if you're an indigenous person and you disagree with this ideology, they say that you have internalized your own oppression and that you've either adopted a false consciousness. This is the technical terminology. You've adopted a false consciousness trying to appease the masters or the dominant discourse.
Yeah.
Or that you're a sellout, you're an Uncle Tom, or you're a traitor to your own people.
Yeah.
So
they're trying to go and turn you against your own and say.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And it's like, who are you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what they're doing actually is masking over those voices that this ideology talks about liberating people, oppression. But if you don't agree with it, then they squash you. This is actually the most oppressive thing in the world.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Or they'll get your own people to turn against you like
that. Yeah, like exactly. Oh, you're not part of the group. Oh, you voted for so and so, or you believe such and such. Well, you're not really native.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, how does that work? Like, what? How does this I'm allowed to have a difference of opinion, and this is the thing that I was actually going to put. I'm going to still put this in another video, but like within my own tribe, the Hopi tribe, in real time, there was a split in the village of Arrivie, and which founded the Hope Villa. And that the person who did that, I know one of the reasons I know about this is that was my great uncle who was part of the split. Is that and this is another thing that's so obvious to Indian people, to natives, that it should be like, why are you allowing this ideology to determine what you think? Because if you think about it, just the fact that tribes exist is a rejection of the group mentality. There's never existed on this continent anything such as called pan-Indianism or pan-Native Americanism. The fact that there's the Pima tribe, which is a completely different belief system, governmental setup, customs, culture than the Cherokee tribe, right? Yeah. We're not just separated by geography, we're also separated by
language and culture.
Yeah, exactly.
And everything.
So and I think what most anthropologists have shown is that as a tribe gets bigger or starts looking for uniformity of opinion, people split off and form other tribes. Yeah. Which is natural because the group ends up there's no more cohesion. Yeah. So people split off and form another tribe and develop their own language, which is completely like natural course, right?
Yeah. But it's only natural, right? Yeah. And that's what usually happens.
Yeah.
It's happened. We were one tribe, T.O., Gila River, Auction, us.
Yeah.
And we migrated because of the river and whatever. And then we probably had some disagreements. So our band said, we're going to stay up here.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can go ahead and go back.
Yeah. Well, like I was saying, I didn't finish. Like the Hopis, they had a split, which is, everybody saw it. It's a recorded split within the tribe. They went and founded another village. And it was because the traditionalists weren't getting it, they were labeled the hostiles actually by the federal government. They opposed boarding school.
Oh, okay.
And because they opposed it, they were shipped to Alcatraz multiple times. So my great uncle was shipped to Alcatraz. He was shipped all over. All these Hopis were 19 of them all over the place because they refused to relinquish their children. Well, you had the friendlies, which we could say are more the modern Hopis. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, but they supported getting their children educated. So there was a split. Yeah. But one of my point is, I don't know of any tribe that has ever enforced groupthink. Yeah. That's not even a trait within Native Americans. We all value the individual. You come together as a community.
And let me ask you. You all have your own political. Yeah. You all have when they go and make a decision, you hear everyone's opinion.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the majority wins.
Nobody says, "Oh, you're not Native."
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question: do you agree with everything your tribal council has ever said?
Heck no.
Well, according to this ideology, if you don't agree, then you're not really native.
Then I get kicked out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the absurdity of this position is like, why are people believing in this?
Well, that's what makes you a healthy community is your disagreements.
Exactly.
To disagree, because you have to go, if you're so adamant about a point that you want to make, or you're so, this is my belief and this is what I want. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to relinquish unless the other person talks you out of it and helps you and you become to a middle ground.
Yeah.
So you go and say, okay, I won't change this, but okay, yeah, we'll do this. And this, it's negotiating, coming together, and you make middle ground. And
exactly.
You're like,
it's compromise.
Yeah, you compromise, and then you move on, and you're like, okay, I didn't get it all this time, but I got a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of being a human being, is that's what I was trying to stress in the videos, is that's the totalitarian nature of this belief system. Like, if you're not part of it, you're part of the problem. And it's like, that's scary, because that mindset festers and develops, like I said in the video, like totalitarianism, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, that really did just appear upon the scene. But it had been brewing for a long time. But the same thing is happening here in America, where before totalitarianism can take true form, it has to be accepted within an ideological framework. You have to have a mindset that believes in it. And I think that's what's happening. And it's sad, because there's a lot of natives that are buying into this woke ideology, this identity politics, critical race theory. And I don't think they've seen beneath the surface of it. I don't think they do. They're listening to the phrases, the slogans. Mm-hmm. And I think also like you asked me the question earlier, why do I think it's caught on so quickly? I think a lot of cultural factors are influencing it. Social media, number one. Yeah. The fact that, here's what happens when most young, impressionable mind kids go to college. They don't have the ability to answer these deep epistemological arguments. And so you get bogged down in all these philosophical questions. You're like, you know what? I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm embarrassing myself. Yeah, I'm embarrassing myself.
So I just go along with
it. And then you take a hot button issue like racism, and you're like, I'm not going to even speak about that, because who am I to say? And I'm going to look like a fool.
They just stay quiet.
Yeah, so they stay quiet. And so it's sad, because they're actually being manipulated and exploited by these teachers and by this movement. And what's happening is actual Latinos, actual indigenous people, actual black people, actual minorities are being crushed by this ideology. And these other people are thinking, no, we're actually liberating. It's like, you're not liberating me. You're not listening to my voice. Like someone like me, because I'm objecting to this ideology, I would be labeled as false consciousness, or it'd probably be called an apple. You know what I mean? Right on the outside, white in the middle, or that, I'm literally would be told that, that's because you're acting white. You're acting white.
That's what I was gonna say.
Or your half of your whiteness is dominating your. I was like, are you kidding me? This is what we've come to. This is how you're gonna view me, and not as a human being. And another reason why, on a personal level, I have little sisters who are just like me, half and half. I have a whole entire family member on both sides of my family who are they're non-native. Yeah. And so I'll never allow an ideology to allow me to be suspicious of them and to look at them like they're inherently racist. Like that's to me is just inhuman. The fact that people, and I started thinking about this like on a cultural level. Like, wait, so you're going to tell me that Eric Clapton, who's a famous blues player, who's played with all kinds of blues players across the world, that he's also inherently racist? And so is Brad Pitt. I guess he's racist because he's white. And then Johnny Cash. And like everybody that I like, so that they actually saw, now I need to look beneath the surface at their motivation and what they said and deconstruct their guitar playing and deconstruct their lyrics. And I was like, this is an ideology of like racial paranoia, of like hate. It's like, it's not liberating. This is the exact opposite of all that. It's like, I'll never, this to me is like the hill I will die on. I will never allow this, because I work with people. I have friendships with people who are not, they're non-native. They're, I almost hate saying the word, but they're white, right? Yeah. And most people I come into contact with are too busy trying to raise their family, get along in life, earn enough time off to go to Disney World or the beach. Yeah. They're not racist. I don't know if any of them have a racist bone in their body.
They're just trying to live life and create memories with their kids.
Yeah, that's it. Live. Yeah, and live. And now they're being accused of being part of the white supremacist, white dominant, white fragility, white complicity. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of books around this topic. It's like, wow, like, how are you going to accuse an entire race of people as being privileged, which is, to me, this is actually the most terrifying part of this ideology. Is the whole lived experiences part, or which is the whole situated standpoint epistemology, is what this ideology has effectively done is, people don't realize when they say the word privilege, there's actually, it's a technical term. I mean, it's a term within the movement, but it's tied into the technical apparatus of it. So privilege, what that means is that you have your epistemology is different than someone else's epistemology. So if you're a underprivileged person, or you're a minority or oppressed group of people according to this system of thought, then you have a different way of viewing the world than does a privileged person.
Yeah.
That's by default, it's called privilege. You don't even know you have privilege. You know what I mean? So someone like me or someone that's full-blooded white, they don't know they have privilege. So what this actually means is I'm locked into my own intellectual mind, my own way of viewing the world, just as you're locked into your own. And we don't have a shared moral universe anymore. So we have no way to communicate to one another. So what I'm saying is that, so what this does is it actually destroys the very ability to reach out to people
and to understand each other.
Yeah, and so what this actually does is this ideology actually destroys any conception of racial progress and therefore any conception of racial harmony. Yeah, because there's never going to be such a thing.
Yeah, because they're always going to look at it as they don't understand me and I don't understand them.
Exactly.
So like, I mean, you know, I someone we worked with very closely, you know, I won't say their name, but you know, they're non-native, and the cool thing about when I build a relationship with them is that I got to see their viewpoint of certain things. I mean, because we do grow up differently. Yeah. Because culturally, we just grow up differently.
Yeah.
And so you are taught certain way, or you see it's what you see and what you know. And then I got to see their viewpoint, and then he got to see my viewpoint.
Yeah.
And together, like, he's like, okay, that makes sense now. Why, you know, things are the way that they are. And then I understand, like, but also I got to look at the bigger picture or further to help our people, because we got to look at these things that I never ever thought about before.
Yeah.
And so I think together, that's what makes you guys, you know, we both have to share.
It's almost like, that's what you're describing is the natural process of how cultures change and adapt. There's never existed a culture that was called a pure, pristine culture.
No, it doesn't exist. Constantly, because the times have changed. I mean, you know, even, you know, with work stuff.
Well, that's the thing, is like those cultures that didn't change, they ossified and died. They went extinct. So it's like, why are you adopting an ideology that doesn't allow that change? Yeah, it's like you're actually impeding real progress. And I don't mean like the modernist view of progress, but I mean actual real life human beings dealing with each other. Like this ideology, it creates, like I think I said already, but like a racial paranoia.
Yeah.
And like, oh, you're part of the dominant discourse in society. You'll never understand my plight as the underprivileged. And so what it does is it stops the motivation to even try. The thing is that within the, we're talking about privilege, is that within the intersectionality paradigm, the framework, if you're beautiful, which is a completely subjective category, everybody has a different opinion on what's beauty.
What's beautiful?
So if you're considered beautiful, that's a privilege that you have over someone who's considered ugly. But it's like, but how do we define that?
But everybody, like they say, beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. Well, it's like, you know, like the little paintings that my kids made for me
are beautiful.
Yeah, it's more priceless than any Vincent van Gogh painting. You know, so it's the subjective. Or like, what do you think about the chapter on disability studies or fat studies? Were you shocked about the fat studies department? Yeah, it's crazy, right?
I was like, so now these poor people who are already suffering with whatever disability, and some are happy. They don't see anything wrong with their disability, or they don't allow it to hold them back. But now they're being told, oh no, they're oppressing you because they put you in a group. And I'm like, did they even ask for that?
That's exactly, well, that's just it. They don't. Any counter evidence, any counterfactuals that contest with or contradicts their pristine theory, well, they don't revise the theory. They just get rid of the evidence. They just push. So I mean, you lose the voice of the actual indigenous person or the people in the process. It's like, you know, obesity is a medical thing. It's based on objective knowledge, but they reject that. This is a whole social constructivism. Yeah. It's like, wow, you're actually maybe killing people. You know what I mean? Like, what if somebody is obese and has heart problems or other medical comorbidities?
Tried to lose weight, and it's just.
But it's almost like this has come from another planet.
Yeah, that one blew me away. I was like, this is that right there. I was like, I'm gonna tell my kids, read this right here. Tell me what you think of that, and say that's what this stuff that you guys are seeing. Do you believe that?
That's the consequence of it. Yeah,
no,
yeah.
Like it is so wrong.
Well, like for instance, okay, I don't know if did you hear about what happened to the engineer who's a computer scientist or computer engineer that worked at Google named James Damore? Have you ever heard about this story? So Google sent out an email to all of its staff asking for input on how we can attract more women into the engineering field in computer science. And so he interpreted it as a very literal email. And so he wrote up a 10-page memo and sent it off to Google. And I actually
did.
And I read it. It's 10 pages. It's a PDF. Anybody can download it on Google right now. It's a really well written essay. I mean, it's really good.
Yeah.
Nowhere in that essay is he arguing any kind of sexist point of view.
Yeah.
Nothing like that. He's saying, well, there may be other factors that are cultural, that are besides just cultural factors, that are inherent factors within the differences between men and women that are actually objectively standards, right? Based on objective reality. Well, he was fired for that memo. And what people didn't realize until he was fired, this man was autistic. So when he saw the email, he interpreted it as a literal email he needs to literally apply. And that's just one of the things with, if you're familiar with autism, it's figurative metaphorical language is really a tough concept for many people that are autistic. And that's not putting them down, but that's a reality for many people.
Yeah.
So here's this ideology that's supposed to be liberating people, and yet it's being used to crush this autistic man.
Yeah.
That's like what reality are we living in? Like, how could you hold to this ideology that's doing this to this poor autistic man? He spoke at, he actually met up with these, Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian. And they did a sit-in, not a sit-in, that's the opposite word. They did a lecture at, I think it was in Portland, actually, Portland, Oregon, at some convention. He was able to give his position and talk about it. But it was like, man, that's actually discrimination against you, if anything.
Yeah.
But the people that you offend and that have the reins of power in our culture, they don't see it that way. You're attacking their sacred cow and you need to go. So you're not part of the group. We ostracize you. We cancel you. That's what cancel culture is. We're canceling you from society. Yeah. And it's funny because a lot of people don't see it that way. They think, oh, the cancel culture, like I said, it's affecting a lot of very famous, wealthy people. And it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. You're set for life. But if it affects me, that's going to definitely hurt me. It's going to harm me, seriously.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but at the same token now, we're living in an area where I have to really choose and watch what you say around someone because of that.
Well, that's just it. That's what people are saying. We don't live in the free and open society we did as we were kids. Yeah. It's gone. It's like the fact that you have to be completely conscious about everything you say because you may offend someone at any time. Yeah. Even if you're doing it completely on accident, you're already doomed. You're guilty. You're done. You know what I mean?
And
there's no forgiveness.
I feel bad because I noticed. When this whole stuff happened over the summer and these whole riots and and really you could see everyone's just dividing.
Yeah.
I was like, man, what kind of reaction am I going to get when I go to a store?
Oh,
like, yeah. Everybody get races, whatever, and I just learned whatever.
Yeah.
But it was the opposite, and I thought it was weird.
Oh, really?
Because I'll go to the store and I'll see a white person, and they're like, move out of my way, or like, oh, hi, and I'm just like,
oh, the opposite.
Yeah,
that's even more.
And I'm like, this is so wrong. Like you don't treat me any different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like I don't even know you. Yeah. So why am I going to go and be mean or and I don't treat them anyway. I'm just there to get my groceries and get out.
Yeah, yeah.
But it was it's been a bit weird.
Really?
Yeah.
See now that's where that's new to me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, because normally I get the opposite. I'm used to getting the looks of why is she here?
Well, see, that's the thing is I wonder if I'm just thinking this out as I'm saying this, but like that's what they want.
Well, yeah.
They want deferment, constant, you know. And so it's like I don't want to be treated any different than anybody else. I want to be treated the same as and I want to earn. And
I want to just be respected. That's
exactly.
Unless I don't know you, you don't know me.
You don't want anybody to bend the knee to you.
No, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like I'm not better than you.
Yeah.
Or I don't expect.
Well, that's why. Well, you're thinking that way because I'm gonna apply postmodern theory to you.
Okay.
Or this ideology. you're thinking that way because you grew up under that paradigm, that worldview that says there's merit in the world and you have to earn the merit and respect. And they're saying that that is the dominant discourse. And they need to tear that down. And you'll be liberated from that once they tear society down. That's the revolution. That's what intersectionality is about. A lot of people look at intersectionality as a heuristic device or as a tool that you can use on its own, which you can. I mean, I'm not arguing you can't, but the whole point of intersectionality is to get you to realize that the problems you encounter is because of your identities in a group are marginalized. And so, but that's not the point of intersectionality. That's just part of it. But the real point of intersectionality is its social justice framework is to get you to want to overthrow society, to encounter, to cause a revolution, to burn the system down. Yeah. That's why they talk about systemic, infrastructural, institutional systems, because that's what they're talking. The overall goal of intersectionality as part of this ideology is to get you to wake up and to want to tear society down and build it anew on more equitable and egalitarian principles. So that's the whole point behind it. So a lot of people don't realize that, but a lot of people kind of, I almost said the word foolishly, but I don't know if that's right. I would just say a lot of people adopt this ideology because they think it's liberating. Yeah. But it's the opposite of that. Yeah. But it's frightening. So
it's weird. I don't know. I noticed that.
I got another paper. So kind of tied into what I was talking about with intersectionality. I actually got this off the YouTube from Benjamin Boyce is a YouTube video. It's called Intersectionality Research in Psychological Science, Resisting the Tendency to Disconnect, Dilute, and Depoliticize. So that's like right off the bat, I'm like, okay. So what this article is about is a scholarly article, and it's the authors of this article are upset with the fact that within the realm of psychology, people are using the concept of intersectionality without the framework of social justice, about the woke ideology. And so this paper is criticizing those people, right? So what they're saying is, in this article, we review intersectional theory and praxis, examine psychological science and its resistance to fully incorporating intersectionality, and highlight how research must shift to be truly intersectional. Finally, we issue a call to the field to integrate intersectionality theory and praxis and to resist the tendency to dilute, depoliticize intersectionality theory and disconnect it from its social justice frame. So that's the agenda. That's what they're after. So many people think that intersectionality is some liberating concept because they haven't quite grasped it yet. Yeah. But the best way I can think about, like maybe help like to grasp this, which is what I've been trying to think about for the past couple of weeks, and it's like I can't figure out how to articulate this. So it's still like in its embryonic form, but like within Christian theology, you have the doctrine of original sin, which you've probably heard of, like the doctrine of original sin. Well, that doctrine has multiple functions, but one of the functions of the doctrine of original sin is to wake people up to the fact that they're in a bad condition. That's the bad news, that you're not right with God. Yeah. And the only way you can get right with God is to be, what's that? Repent? Yeah, repent. Well, it's like to wake you up for your need for Christ, right? So you need a perfect mediator, so in other words, the doctrine of original sin is to wake you up to the fact that you're not right with God. That's the bad news. Okay. So like they say within Christian theology that you have to first hear the bad news before you can hear the good news, right? Because otherwise the good news is like, what do you mean I'm saved from my sins? What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So it's a function of that.
Well, it's like you break down a kid to show them they're wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
To build them back up, to show them.
You're nurturing them. Yeah. And that's exactly right. So this doctrine of intersectionality, it's this kind of the same function. It's to wake you up to the fact that you're marginalized. It's out of your control. You're a victim, and you're a victim of the dominant discourses in society. And the overall telos, the overall teleology, the overall goal, purpose, the agenda of this is within the social justice framework is to make you want to burn down society, to start anew, to usher in a revolution. Yeah. That's the point of it. So many people haven't grasped that, but that's why this article, it's just this just came out back in November, I think November 20th. Yeah, no, sorry, November 30th, this article came out. And it's like a gift. It's like you're getting the actual people, what they think about the research. And they're criticizing. This again is the most contradictory part of this worldview, because the people that wrote that are upset with these psychologists who are using intersectionality outside of its framework of social justice, of woke ideology. But it's like, wait a second. Aren't you the one saying that everything's a social construct? Why are you upset with these people who are taking your theory and applying it in their own social construct?
Yeah.
Why can't two people play this game? You know what I mean? They don't want that to happen. They're really upset about that. Like, no, in order for this to be used properly, it needs to be used properly within our worldview. Yeah, it's like, no, this is, and so they're upset about it. It's like, well, so what is this about then? It's just it's a game to them. It's not a game. It's about power to them. You know, so it's like, this is just absurd. I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, but if you want someone to understand this, have them read the disability and fat studies.
Oh yeah, I know, it's crazy.
That was like
eye-opening.
Yeah, it's like so like I don't know.
Well, it's well, that's what I mean. That's like if you're it's almost like it's so hard for, like, I almost said normal people to grasp this because it's so alien.
It is.
It's like, wait a second, you're telling me that by going to the doctor and I'm part of this apparatus of power, and that the doctor is telling me to get healthy, and he's actually causing me to feel oppressed by telling me to work out, get in shape, or giving me medicine. Like, what if you're told that you could extend your life by another 10 years if you lose weight? You know, it's like, how do you deal with like the problems with your knees or the problem with your heart or your high cholesterol? Are you just going to whisk that away and argue that that's just oppressive literature? It's like that's crazy.
Like,
and it's just, to me, this is really dangerous because that's actual human beings.
Yeah.
That's their life on the line. And you're putting your life on the line in the service of an ideology that doesn't care about you.
Yeah.
You're just cannon fodder. Yeah. I don't know. It's nuts. Oh, what's your opinion of lived experiences approach to knowledge? What do you think about the lived experiences approach?
So do you mean like if I didn't live it, I don't understand it?
No, it's that's one way to say it, but it's like your lived experiences trump medical science, basically.
Oh.
Yeah, right. I mean, I said it in such a way that people that are listening to it be like, no, that's not what it means. But I stacked the deck right there. But your lived experiences, which is what standpoint epistemology is, or the whole situated knowledge, is that what you say, no one from another group has the ability to contradict, criticize, or add to the conversation. That you have free reign to do whatever.
But that's the whole part that we were talking about with cultural and how it evolves.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
give and take.
Because without that, you're not going to evolve. And
see, this is where I have a really hard time with this on this point, is because what this does, like, it's one thing to say my grandfather and my grandmother. Let's take my grandfather, full-blooded Hopi. He taught me when I was growing up, and I went with him to the reservation, back to the Hopi land. He taught me to never be ashamed of who I am and to learn from as many people as possible. But because he said that, he would be marginalized within this theory because that is him adopting a false consciousness. That's not part of the group identity. It's like, wait a second, what? So the other problem I have with this is it's one thing to say that my grandfather and grandmother have a valid point of view, which they do. And this is like the nuanced part that people have to hold to. It's like, this is where people get bogged down. This is why I think this is why they accept this ideology, because it comes at you with so many different, bombards your system with so many different epistemological, ethical questions that if you're not trained in that, you don't know how to handle it. And so you just absorb it and move on. Is that it's one thing to say my grandparents who are indigenous, have knowledge that is valuable and needs to be listened to. And I agree with that. I don't want to ever have a position or ideology or worldview like the assimilation era, which says that their viewpoints don't matter at all. All right. But that's not what this ideology does. This ideology elevates their lived experiences above anything else. There is no other objective reality. It's just simply the lived experiences that counts. That's not
of who though.
Yeah, that's just theirs only. That's what they're saying. That's what they mean by saying that if you have privilege, you can't add to or criticize the conversation, because your privilege is that you don't know have it. Yeah. So it's like, how do we ever get to truth? How do we ever we're locked? Yeah. That's what I mean. We're actually locked into our own alien. We're actually foreign to each other at that point.
So what if I'm trying to think of how an example to put it as. So what if all this time I'm trying to think of something, I don't know, Stone Age or, like we were doing something so long because that's the way we were taught. And then a person comes and is like, well, that's not how you use it. This is what it really
Yeah,
is.
exactly. Yeah.
Like,
How do you learn?
Yeah.
This actually stops learning.
Yeah.
Well, like let's say if you held to this ideology, and let's say some other culture invented the wheel.
Yeah.
And you're going to say, oh, we didn't invent it. We don't want no part of that because that's cultural appropriation. It's like, wait, what?
It could have changed our life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like that. And that's what I mean. It's like, to me, as being native doesn't mean that I believe in native right or wrong. It's like, no, being human being is that I'm learning from all these different people, which is what we all do naturally. It's just that sometimes people adopt an ideology that confuses them and gets them to think in these like binary left versus right, or in native versus non-native. And it's like, no, it's not. It's like, as on one of the talks, or not talks, but like in one of the videos, I think the second video we're talking about, I was trying to make the point that a lot of people will say that this is what this ideology does. It knows that it has no real intellectual foundation, and you can attack it with logic or rationality. So what does it do? It goes after logic and rationality. It attacks logic and rationality as being Western imperialism. So if you have the ability to think logically, which we all do, and if you think then the laws of logic and rationality, which we all do, and this is the whole point of this, what I'm saying is that what this ideology does is it attacks that and says that, oh, if you believe in logic, you've adopted a discourse that is the dominant discourse, and that needs to be deconstructed and subverted, and you need to be shown that that's oppressive. It's like, yeah, but you're using logic, once again, to refute logic. You're assuming it when you're trying to deny it. This is exactly what my teacher was doing.
Yeah.
He was trying to tell everybody we don't exist. And I'm like, dude, you're existing in the very fact of trying to deny existence. Like you're saying we're all an illusion, but how are you able to rise above the illusion? This is what actually the technical term in the literature, I'm not in the literature of identity, but in the literature of philosophy is actually called sociology of knowledge, which is many sociologists and theorists will actually back themselves into a corner on accident. They'll argue so heavily for enculturation of knowledge that it's so culturally encoded that you can't ever arrive at truth. But then if that's the case, why did you write a book about it? Because apparently your book is nothing but a cultural construct. Yeah. It's not, there's no truth in it. And so in order to get out of that, Herbert Marcuse does this all the time. Most of these scholars have done this. They'll argue so vociferously for their position that they'll lock themselves into a corner, and they realize it. And so now they have to try to justify how to get out of that corner. And they'll say, oh, for instance, if you really believe that reality is a social construct, then you have no way of having a correct theory. You have no way of having any kind of validity to your theory. So this is why they try to ground it in situated knowledge. This is why they try to ground it in standpoint epistemology and in lived experiences, because they realize they've backed themselves into a corner. So they need to find some way to tell people, okay, the reason why you want to fight against oppression is because of this. It's like, no, you're still being inconsistent. Why? That's like the intellectual sleight of hand that's being done by these academics. Is on one hand, they're denying objective knowledge, which destroys morality, the reason to fight against it in the first place. They realize that. Yeah. And it's like, on the other hand, they've got to try to save their theory. So they bring back in the moral dimension in through lived experiences. And so, oppression is a real thing, and it's an objective dimension of reality. It's like, wait, no, if I'm going consistent with your theory, there is no objective reality, so there's no objective oppression. So this is just power on your path, and you're lying. You know what I mean? Yeah. But most people don't see that, which is a travesty. So
because I see it. I hear it like, well, you don't know because you never lived.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like I may not walk a mile in your shoes, but I still know that you're walking and you have shoes. It's like, I get it. Like, yeah, I don't expect you to understand me either, but by that mentality, there's no hope for us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So to me, that people do that because I think, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody that says that or does that, because I think a lot of times people hold to a position because it is comforting. No. You know what I mean? It's frightening to accept. And a lot of people hold to things that are like
comfortable.
Yeah, it makes them comfortable. Or it's like, I was going to say, it's like dysfunctional form of being a human or pathologies, because that in itself is like, that gives meaning to their life. It's like, it's a comforting thing and it's frightening to have to accept that you're responsible for your own actions.
Well, do you also think this movement is catching on because a lot of people don't have faith or don't know, have something to hold on to?
I definitely agree with that.
They don't have a culture. They don't have an identity. So here's something huge. Oh, I can catch on to this.
Yeah.
And
no, okay. I agree. No, I think that that's one of the cultural factors of today is religion is so watered down today that I can only speak for like the Christian side of things, the Christian community, the Catholic and Christianity is that, or the Protestant, the Catholic and Protestant side of things is that you look at our culture and it's, like I said, it's so watered down. There's no substance there. I mean, if you look at the Protestant side, it's churches are filled with Starbucks cafeterias, Starbucks cafes. You have worship teams.
Yeah.
People go to church now to worship. And people go to church to be entertained instead of to worship. And everything's so, you have this thing called the wealth and health prosperity gospel, which basically teaches that God wants you to be healthy and wealthy. So when hard times hit, it's your fault. You don't have enough faith. It's like there's the biblical muscular Christianity that once existed is gone in American society. And I think that's one of the reasons why this has caught on, especially amongst the youth, is because I can go into a deep conversation about that. But I think that I think this is one of the hardest things for people that are I'm trying to avoid this term because I don't like using it because it short circuits people's ability to think. But sometimes labels are the apt description. So I'm going to say it like this. So a lot of times I think people that are on the left side of the political aisle, on the left, because they don't grow up with religion or see religion, they've adopted a secular viewpoint. They're kind of blind to the fact that what they're doing is religion. You know what I mean? It's almost, and I say this because I hold to a viewpoint that man is by nature homo religioso. That's I hold to that description. Throughout the history of thought, there's been different descriptives to describe human beings. One is that man is homo sapien, the thinking animal. Some have said that man is homo fabricum, man the tool maker or the maker of things. But I think John Calvin in his Institutes really hit the nail on the head by saying that man is homo religioso. He is by nature religious. So that when he gives up religion or gives up belief in God, he doesn't just believe in nothing. He believes in anything else but God. So he simply substitutes the true God for a false God, for an idol. Oh. And this idol, this is again, I think another defect of people's thinking is that they think that idols are mainly made of wood and statues and stone. No. An idol can be a complex philosophical theory or an entire ideology, or it can be something as common as fame, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know what I mean? It could be the worship of money. It could be any of those things that takes people away from God. It could even be a significant other, like a spouse, something or something that
pulls you away and not
from God Himself.
Well, because I believe that we are that, because in life you go searching for something, and even when you get it, you're still not happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and you hear it all the time.
Yeah,
people.
yeah. So it's you just got me thinking about another quote. Blaise Pascal says, it's a really good quote. How does it go? There is a God-shaped vacuum at the heart of every human being that cannot be filled by the created things in this universe, by finite things. Only God can fill that heart-shaped vacuum, that void in the heart. And that's what, Pascal said something else in his famous book, The Pensées, which he said, all of man's problems stem from the fact that he can't stem from the fact that he can't sit silently in a room by himself for more than 5 minutes. He has to constantly be pursuing something, doing something to get himself off the infinite void that's in front of him. So he jumps into hunting, or he jumps into surfing, or into playing guitar, or into collection of books, or into sex, or into fame, or into money, or into constantly having something there to titillate him. You know what I mean? At all times. Because he doesn't want to ever face the fact that he's mortal. Yeah. And I think that's what happens is when you strip our culture from any religious significance, because people are homo religioso at heart, they're naturally religious, they're going to look for something to fulfill that void. Even in the most damaging part, or the most dangerous part, is that people don't see this as religion. And so they assume that what they're doing is on the side of righteousness. Yeah. It's like, no, and I think this is one of the most scariest parts about this whole ideology. And I have in that closet there, I have a file cabinet with probably like 1,200 to 1,500 scholarly articles. I probably have like 60 of them in there on this identity politics literature. and again, this is just, I realize this is my own subjective interpretation. It's anecdotal to me, but nowhere in the literature do I ever come across the words grace, forgiveness, mercy, nowhere about reconciliation. Those concepts to me are only found within the biblical worldview. Why are you allowing, if you're a Christian or believe in the Christian worldview, why are you allowing a foreign alien worldview to compete with the Christian worldview? Mm-hmm. Because within the literature of identity politics, there is no words for reconciliation. See, like one of the things about Christianity is that not only does it provide reconciliation between God and man, but reconciliation between man and man. Yeah. That's why the God, like I'm going to say this, and this is going to offend people, but the gospel, if it's true, is the one worldview, the one tool that you need that will actually change and transform society, because it breaks the human heart, it breaks the human condition. It diagnoses the human condition correctly. It talks about sin. It doesn't say, no, the problem with society is our institutions. It says, no, it's within your own heart. Look within you. It's right there. Yeah, it's an empirical reality. Actually, it's right here.
And that's the problem with our society, though. They do not want to look at themselves.
They don't want to look inward, yeah.
They don't, because they know they're wrong.
Yeah.
And it hurts.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
It's very humbling.
It is. It's actually extremely humbling.
It is, and it's hard, but I think that's what's wrong with us today.
I agree.
We're selfish and we want to think, no, it's not me, it's a society.
It's something else.
And I blame them for the way I am. But no, you're wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
So are you going to do a whole thing about how it's infiltrated the churches?
Oh, that's a good question.
That would be a good one, because I think there's a lot of people that are going to church and thinking there's nothing wrong with it, that everything's righteous. And it's like,
no, that's the one thing that's really scary, because Antonio Gramsci, who was, hold on, is it Gramsci or is it Herbert Marcuse? Yeah, that's the one thing that is scary, because Antonio Gramsci, this is part of his cultural hegemony, is that according to Marxist theory, well, according to the old school Marxists, to Marx himself, the workers of the world will unite because they'll realize the beauty of Marxism. And the proletariat will rise up against the bourgeois, the owners of the means of production. They'll rise up against them. They'll overthrow the bourgeoisie, and they'll usher in this paradise where everybody will be equal. But that wasn't happening, right? And so Gramsci comes along in the 1920s and 1930s and says that the problem is that people have bought into the cultural hegemony of capitalism. He developed this whole intricate theory. And that what needs to be done is that we need to educate the underclass. We need to give them these critical tools. Basically, from my point of view, what he's talking about is actually indoctrination. We need to indoctrinate people into the Marxist analysis, and to get them to realize their oppression is actually under capitalism, and that it's created these different classes of people, the owners of the means of production and everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so we need to overthrow society. And how we do that is not through not through forcing people from the top down, but for infiltrating society through the institutions. So what he was talking about is we need to take over the institutions. This is called the Long March to the. He didn't actually come up with this term, but somebody else did. I forget the guy's name. That said that what we need to do is overtake the institutions, and one of the key critical institutions in society is the law system and religious aspect of the system. And if we can do that, we'll finally take over the entire system. Because if you think about it, churches, religion is the most voluntary social institution in society, but it's also the most organic, and its tentacles are everywhere in society. If you can subvert Christianity, which is the dominant religion still in America, if you can subvert that one institution throughout society, you've effectively won the culture. You've destroyed the culture. Now everybody will eventually leap into the arms of cultural market. And this is the thing, I've got this from James Lindsay, that he has a YouTube channel it's actually called New Discourses. Mm-hmm. And it was weird because the day after it was like 4 days later after I published that one video, he published a video on Herbert Marcuse and Gramsci. And I was like, oh, really cool. It's like, man, this is awesome, And I felt like a little dumb kid right there. Yeah. And so these elite socialites are not so. These elite academics who believe this way, they end up getting the culture to believe it, and they end up getting normal human beings to believe in this ideology, and they all usher us into this blender and they chop us all up, and it never works. It's like this pseudo reality that doesn't work because it's not based upon any empirical reality. No. It's not grounded in real reality, and it doesn't know anything about human nature. It assumes that if we tear down society and rebuild it, then we're going to usher in paradise. It's like that's never worked. Yeah. This has happened, and this is what the most disgusting part is. This is actual tactic. This is a ploy. Is that Marxists will say, well, that wasn't real Marxism. That wasn't real communism. That wasn't real socialism. So what happened in Russia, that wasn't the real thing. Well, how about in China? Well, that wasn't the real thing. What about in Cuba? Well, that wasn't the real thing. Well, how about in Vietnam? Well, that wasn't the real thing. And this goes on forever, right? Yeah. Those aren't real conceptions of Marxism. Those are foreign entities. Those were taken over by the elites that ruined the movement. So this, and people buy into that. Like, oh, okay, so we just do it this time. It'll work because we're more righteous. We're more virtuous. It'll work because we'll say it works. And one of the most frightening things I've ever read, I can't think of the guy's name right now. He's a Marxist theorist. And he says this: the worst thing you can do is to know history and to read history, because if you read history, you're limiting yourself. Yeah. A true revolutionary, visionary thinker doesn't read history because that limits your visionary, what you see. It's like, so you don't want to learn from the past mistakes? Yeah. Like, that's crazy. Like that's and that to me is also so foreign to indigenous people, because indigenous people, if anything, they learn their lessons, and that's how they adapt.
Well, I was gonna say, it's like we were taught, don't do the same thing again.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's the opposite. Well, it's like the fact that natives have been so resilient is because they bend and flex with whatever's coming at them. And this ideology is telling me that it's so backwards. I don't know.
That's one thing I was like, no, I don't know. I mean, but it's scary because if people aren't understanding it or seeing it, they're going to go along with it. And
yeah.
Yes, you're trying to tell them like, no, you know.
I honestly feel like, not me, myself, but the people that are the ones trying to tell everybody that this is a horrible thing that you're adopting, it's almost like, in a way, they're like John the Baptist in the wilderness, crying to everybody like, stop. You're going down this road that's going to put us all in the blender. Yeah. This has not worked anywhere it's been tried. And the mask of liberation and oppression is actually, underneath it is Marxist roots, is cultural Marxism. But people don't see that because, you know, again, those are complex topics to talk about. But what this whole identity politics is, this is the thing that really infuriates me, is that assigning people into categories based upon their physical characteristics is racism. Yeah. That's what this ideology is racism. It's like, I don't understand why people aren't seeing that. It's like, that's exactly what the definition of racism. And it's like, and yeah, everybody's like, oh, let's keep doing it. It's like, no.
It's like, oh yeah, but we're not talking about color anymore. We're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, but isn't that the same thing? I go from one group to another group.
Yeah,
now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jump from one to another, hot potato. Do you think Native people or indigenous people should adopt this belief system?
Well, it's like I said, I mean, I think when they look at the outside of what it is, or like not knowing what it really is, and they just see it as, oh, well, we want equality or, you know, justice, then they're all, but of course everybody wants that, you know, they want to be treated fair, want to be respected equally, and that's it, you know, simple as that, but it's not. But the other part is, I always think about, okay, but then I look at my community, do I want equal justice? And say, oh, if someone was to ask me, oh, so are you willing to share your neighbor, your land with a non-native? Oh. Well, heck no, I'm not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So then it makes me against that.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it's almost like this is the point of it, is that it always sounds good in theory. It's until you put it into practice that it produces hell on earth, actually.